The old grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 6, its deep, resonant tone marking the end of another day. For Eleanor, it was less an announcement of evening's arrival and more a countdown, a timer signaling that Richard would soon be home, bringing with him the heavy air of the corporate world and the unspoken expectations that had come to define their 20-year marriage. The house was immaculate, as always. The scent of roasted chicken and rosemary wafted from the kitchen, a warm, welcoming aroma that stood in stark contrast to the creeping chill in Eleanor's heart. She ran a hand over the polished mahogany of the dining table, a family heirloom she'd meticulously cared for. Every surface in their home gleamed, every cushion was plumped, every bill was paid on time from their joint account, an account largely funded, as Richard often reminded her, by his salary. She had once been a different woman, a woman with a fire in her eyes and a portfolio of graphic design work that had won her accolades in a small but competitive agency. She'd met Richard at a gallery opening, him in his sharp suit, her with a splash of paint on her cheek she'd forgotten to wipe away. He'd been charmed by her creative spirit, her infectious laughter. "You're a whirlwind, Elle," he used to say, his eyes full of admiration. "My beautiful, brilliant whirlwind." But whirlwinds, by their nature, are messy. And Richard, a man of order and predictable returns, had slowly, subtly tamed hers. It started with a suggestion. "Why don't you take a little time off when the baby comes? You can always go back." So she did. Then, when their son, Leo, was a toddler, it was another suggestion. "The market's so volatile, Elle, and my career is taking off. It just makes sense for you to be the stable force at home." She'd agreed. For the family, for the stability, for the love she thought they were building. The years passed. Leo grew up and went off to college. Her design software became obsolete, her contacts moved on, and her portfolio gathered dust in a box in the attic. She had become the perfect corporate wife. She hosted flawless dinner parties for his clients, remembered the birthdays of his colleagues' children, and managed their home with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 CEO. Yet, in Richard's eyes, her contributions had no line item on a budget sheet. They were expected. They were simply there, like the air he breathed, or the foundation of the house he lived in, invisible, unacknowledged, and entirely taken for granted. The slights were small at first, like casual jokes at parties. "I earn the money, she spends it," he'd laugh, and his friends would chuckle along. Eleanor would smile, a tight, practiced expression, while a small part of her withered. Then the jokes became sharper, delivered in private. "Another online shopping package, Eleanor? It must be nice to just click buttons while others are in boardrooms." She learned to hide her purchases, even small ones for herself, tucking a new book or a quality brand of tea into the back of the pantry like a guilty secret. Her world had shrunk to the walls of this beautiful, perfectly maintained house that felt more like a gilded cage every day. Tonight, the air was particularly thick with unspoken tension. Richard was trying to land a massive account at his investment firm, and the pressure was making him brittle, his words sharper than usual. He walked in, dropping his briefcase by the door with a thud that echoed Eleanor's own sinking feeling. He loosened his tie, his gaze sweeping the room with a critical eye. "Smells good," he grunted, a perfunctory compliment that held no warmth. He walked over to the mail she'd sorted neatly on the corner of the table. He flicked through the envelopes, tossing most of them aside. He paused at one, a glossy catalog from a high-end kitchenware store. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger as if it were contaminated. "Thinking of new ways to spend my hard-earned money, are we?" Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't even ordered the catalog. It was junk mail. "Richard, it's just mail." "It's all just something with you, isn't it?" he said, tossing it onto the table. He walked past her towards the living room, unbuttoning his cuffs. "It's incredible, really. Some people work. Other people, they just eat. They just consume." The words hung in the air, cold and sharp as shards of glass. "She just eats." The phrase echoed in the pristine silence of the home she managed. It erased every meal she'd ever cooked, every load of laundry she'd ever folded, every sleepless night she'd spent with a sick child, every ounce of her own ambition she had sacrificed on the altar of his comfort and success. She stood there, motionless, the aroma of the rosemary chicken suddenly smelling like ash. In that moment, she wasn't just hurt. She was activated. A dormant switch had been flipped. He had no idea what she did when he was at the office. He had no idea about the other life she had been building, click by click, in the quiet hours of the morning, long before he even woke up. The fire Richard had unknowingly ignited didn't rage outwardly. Instead, it became a slow, controlled burn deep within her. She served dinner, her movements graceful and measured, a perfect mask of domestic calm. She listened to him complain about his incompetent junior analysts and the infuriating demands of his new client. She nodded, she murmured sympathetic phrases, she refilled his wine glass. But behind her quiet eyes, a different narrative was playing out. A narrative written in code, in encrypted files, and in a currency of self-worth that Richard knew nothing about. Her secret life hadn't started out of spite. It had begun 3 years ago, out of sheer, soul-crushing boredom. Leo was in his second year of college, and the silence in the house had become a physical presence. One rainy Tuesday, while cleaning the attic, she'd found it. Her old portfolio. The designs were dated, printed on paper that was starting to yellow, but the spark was still there. The clever use of negative space, the bold typography, the vibrant color palettes. It was like looking at a photograph of a younger, braver self. A wave of grief washed over her so immense it made her sit down on a dusty trunk. It wasn't just a career she had lost. It was a part of her soul. That night, she couldn't sleep. While Richard snored softly beside her, she slipped out of bed and went to the study. On the family iMac, she started searching. Online graphic design courses, freelance design platforms, modern branding trends. The world had changed. The software she knew, Quark Express, and an ancient version of Photoshop were relics. Now it was all about Adobe Creative Cloud, Figma, and social media integration. It was daunting. It was overwhelming. But for the first time in over a decade, she felt a flicker of excitement. With a determination that surprised even herself, she began. She used a credit card she'd opened secretly, paid for with the household money she managed to save by meticulously bargain hunting for groceries, something Richard would have scoffed at. She spent her days after the cleaning and the errands were done, not watching daytime television or having lunch with other corporate wives, but studying. She devoured tutorials, her brain soaking up information like a parched sponge. She practiced for hours, her hand relearning the familiar dance of a stylus on a tablet she'd bought and kept hidden in her closet. Her first client was a friend of a friend, someone starting a small, artisanal bakery. She'd overheard her complaining about the exorbitant quotes she'd received for a logo. Almost involuntarily, Eleanor heard herself say, "I could probably sketch a few ideas for you." The friend was skeptical, but desperate. Eleanor worked for a week, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. She presented 3 concepts. The friend didn't just like them, she was floored. She insisted on paying, and Eleanor, shocked, named a price she thought was modest. The woman wrote a check that was 4 times that amount. "Eleanor, this is professional work. You are a professional," she'd said, her words a balm on a wound Eleanor hadn't realized was still so open. That was the beginning. She named her business the Whirlwind Studio, a private reclamation of Richard's old endearment. Word of mouth was a powerful thing in their affluent community. Her work was elegant, intuitive, and deeply personal. She specialized in what she called legacy branding, creating cohesive digital and print identities for small, high-end businesses. Bespoke wedding invitations that told a couple's story, branding for exclusive charity galas, websites for boutique real estate agents. Her business grew silently and steadily, within the very walls Richard believed were simply her container. She set up a separate business account. She rented a small, discreet P.O. box in the next town over for any business mail. Her client meetings were held at coffee shops or via Zoom calls she took in her car, parked in a quiet corner of a park, with a specially purchased blazer hanging in the back to look the part. Last year, she had become so busy she had to make a choice: turn down work or expand. The thought of employing someone was terrifying. It made it real. It made it bigger. But the idea of turning away the success she had fought so hard for was worse. She found her first hire on a forum for freelance creatives, a young mother in another state, a brilliant illustrator who needed flexible, remote work. A year later, the Whirlwind Studio had a payroll of 4 people, all independent contractors. A project manager, 2 other designers, and an accountant. All women. All working remotely, building their own silent empires from their kitchen tables and home offices. And the money. The money was staggering. She reinvested most of it back into the business. Better software, marketing, higher pay for her team. But the profits were substantial. Far more substantial than Richard, with all his talk of boardrooms and bonuses, could ever imagine. The money sat in a high-yield savings account under her business's name, a secret fortress of independence. So when he stood there, his face a mask of casual disdain, and uttered those 5 brutal words, "She just eats, she doesn't earn," it wasn't just an insult. It was a cosmic irony. It was the clueless pronouncement of a man who slept soundly every night next to a CEO who was out-earning him by a margin that would make his eyes water. And as she cleared the dinner plates, his words didn't sting anymore. They clicked into place, the final piece of a puzzle she hadn't even known she was solving. It was time. After dinner, Richard retreated to the living room with a glass of scotch, flipping through channels on the television with an air of restless dissatisfaction. The sounds of a generic crime drama filled the space between them, but for Eleanor, the only sound was the echo of his words. She just eats, she doesn't earn. She moved through the familiar motions of cleaning the kitchen with a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching herself from above. Her hands were steady as she loaded the dishwasher, wiped the granite countertops until they gleamed, and set the coffee maker for the morning. Each mundane task felt charged with a new, final significance. This was the last time she would perform them as the woman she had been, the woman who absorbed insults and smiled through the pain, the woman who kept her victories silent. The anger she had felt earlier had subsided, crystallizing into something colder and far more powerful: clarity. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge was a hot, messy emotion, and her actions tonight would be anything but. This was about truth. It was about drawing a line so deep and clear in the sands of their marriage that it could never be ignored or erased. For years, she had allowed him to define her worth based on his narrow, materialistic terms. She had accepted his reality as the only reality. Tonight, she was going to present him with a different one. Hers. When the kitchen was spotless, she walked quietly down the hallway to the study. The door clicked softly shut behind her. The room was dark, save for the faint moonlight filtering through the window. She didn't turn on the lamp. The cool blue glow of the IMAX screen was all the light she needed. Her heart began to beat a little faster now, a steady thrum against her ribs. This was the point of no return. She sat in the leather chair, a chair Richard had bought, one he sometimes used on weekends to check his own portfolio. The irony was not lost on her. She typed in her password, a complex string of characters he would never guess, and the screen blinked to life. For a moment, she just stared at her desktop wallpaper, a photo of a windswept beach on the Oregon coast, a place she dreamed of visiting, a place she could now afford to buy a house in if she so desired. The thought was both terrifying and electrifying. With methodical purpose, she opened her secure, encrypted cloud storage. She navigated through the folders, client projects, invoices, brand assets, until she found the one labeled Studio Financials. Inside was another folder, Payroll. She clicked on it. There were files for each of her 4 contractors, but she opened the summary document she received from her accountant on the 1st of every month. The Whirlwind Studio, Monthly Payroll and Earnings Report, Final. The PDF opened. It was a simple, professional document. A column of names, all women she admired and respected. A column for their monthly retainers. A column for project bonuses. And at the bottom, highlighted in a neat, unassuming box, was the line item, Net Studio Profit after payroll and expenses. She stared at the number. It was more than Richard's monthly take-home pay. Significantly more. This single number represented 3 years of clandestine work, of early mornings and late nights, of teaching herself an entirely new industry while the man in the other room saw her as nothing more than a domestic manager. It was the monetary value of her resilience, her creativity, her courage. She took a deep breath, the air in the silent room feeling cool and clean in her lungs. She opened her email client. She composed a new message. In the To field, she typed Richard's personal email address, the one that pinged directly to his phone. In the subject field, she paused. What to write? Check this out? You were wrong? No, that was too emotional, too needy. It would invite an argument, a debate. She wanted no debate. The numbers would speak for themselves. She typed a single, beautifully neutral, corporate-sounding word, payroll. She attached the PDF. Her finger hovered over the trackpad as she dragged the file into the email. It uploaded in a second. For the body of the email, she wrote nothing. A blank page was more powerful than any explanation she could offer. Her silence, paired with the irrefutable data of the document, would be his to interpret. He would have to fill in that blank space himself, with the truth of his own ignorance. Her hand was perfectly still as she moved the cursor to the send button. There was no hesitation, no last-minute doubt, just a profound, liberating sense of rightness. She clicked it. The email vanished from her outbox with a soft whoosh. It was gone. It was done. She leaned back in the chair, her entire body releasing a tension she hadn't even been aware she was holding. She felt Light. The gilded cage had vanished. The door wasn't just unlocked, it had been vaporized. She closed the laptop and stood up. As she walked out of the study and back into the hallway, she heard it. From the living room, the distinct, sharp buzz of a new email notification on Richard's phone. Eleanor didn't go to the living room. She didn't need to witness the exact moment the notification flashed across his screen. She walked calmly to her bedroom, the master suite they had shared for 2 decades. The room, decorated in calming shades of beige and cream, colors Richard had chosen, calling them restful, suddenly felt foreign. It was his space, his sanctuary. She realized with a jolt that she didn't have a sanctuary. Her work, her true self, had been relegated to stolen moments and hidden folders. Her sanctuary was a P.O. box in another town. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded neatly in her lap, and simply waited. She could hear the low murmur of the television, which continued for another minute or two. The crime drama was probably reaching its own climax, a shootout or a confession. Then, abruptly, the sound was cut off. Silence. The silence that followed was different from the earlier quiet of the house. This was a heavy, charged silence. It was the sound of a worldview cracking. It was the sound of a man's reality being forcibly rewritten. She could picture him perfectly, picking up his phone, his brow furrowed in annoyance at the interruption, his eyes scanning the sender, Eleanor, his thumb swiping to open it. The subject line, Payroll, would confuse him for a second. He'd think it was a mistake, an accidental forward. Then he would open the attachment. She imagined his face, the initial confusion giving way to disbelief, his eyes scanning the names, the figures. His gaze, trained to analyze financial data with ruthless efficiency, would instantly grasp the scale of it. He would see the retainers, the bonuses, the total payroll. And then, his eyes would lock on that final number at the bottom of the page. The net profit. Her profit. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. 3 minutes. 4. She counted each beat of her heart, a slow, steady rhythm. She was no longer afraid. The power had shifted. She wasn't the one who needed to explain herself. He was. Finally, she heard movement. Not the usual confident tread of his expensive shoes on the hardwood floor. It was a hesitant, shuffling sound. He appeared in the bedroom doorway, his phone clutched in his hand like a piece of foreign technology he couldn't comprehend. His face was pale, his mouth slightly agape. The mask of the confident, commanding executive had shattered, and in its place was a man she barely recognized. A man who looked lost in his own home. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. He held up the phone as if it were evidence of a crime. Eleanor didn't stand. She met his gaze evenly, her calmness a stark contrast to his disarray. "It's exactly what the subject line says it is, Richard," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It's the payroll." "The payroll for what?" He took a step into the room, his confusion warring with a rising tide of indignation. "Whose payroll? Is this some kind of joke?" "It's for my business," she stated, letting the words settle in the space between them. "The Whirlwind Studio." He stared at her, a flicker of memory in his eyes. "Whirlwind? That nickname I used to?" He couldn't finish the sentence. The chasm between the loving pet name of the past and the corporate entity on his screen was too vast to bridge. "You have a business? What are you talking about, Eleanor? You design party invitations for your friends." "I started with invitations for friends," she corrected him gently. "I now have a team of 4 and a portfolio of clients across the country. That document is the financial summary for last month." He swiped through the PDF again, his thumb trembling slightly. He was processing it now, the numbers aligning in his head, the implications crashing down on him one by one. The secret credit card, the P.O. box, the hushed phone calls, the hours she spent in the study. All the little details he had dismissed as the trivialities of a bored housewife were suddenly recontextualized into the actions of a determined entrepreneur. His face cycled through a series of emotions: confusion, shock, a flash of admiration that was quickly extinguished by his own wounded pride, and then finally it settled on anger. It was the anger of a man who has been deceived, but more than that, it was the anger of a man who has been made to look like a fool. "You've been lying to me," he said, his voice regaining its familiar authoritative tone. "For years. You've been running this secret operation behind my back, in my own house." "It's my house too," Eleanor replied, her voice still quiet, but with an edge of steel he had never heard before. "And I wasn't lying, Richard. I was surviving. I was building something for myself because you made it abundantly clear that my role here had no value in your eyes. My contributions were invisible to you, so I decided to make a contribution that could be quantified. She finally stood up, moving to the dresser and looking at her reflection in the mirror. She saw the same face, but the eyes were different. The fear was gone. Tonight, she continued, turning back to him, you said that I just eat, that I don't earn. You said it with such casual cruelty, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. I realized you don't see me at all. You see a dependent, an expense on your ledger. So I decided to forward you the ledger from my business. Not to hurt you, Richard, but to show you. He was speechless. The argument he wanted to have, the one where he was the wronged party, the one where he could thunder about deceit and betrayal, was slipping through his fingers. How could he rage about her secret success when it was his own dismissiveness that had made it a secret in the first place? Her quiet, irrefutable logic had disarmed him. Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked, the anger draining from his voice, leaving it hollow. Eleanor gave a small, sad smile. Would you have supported it, truly? Or would you have called it a cute little hobby? Would you have patronized me, offered to look over my books, and treated it like a child's lemonade stand? Would you have seen it as my success, or as an amusing distraction that was taking time away from your needs? She paused, letting the questions hang in the air. I think we both know the answer to that. He had no response. He just stood there, in the doorway of their life, looking at the woman he thought he knew, and realizing he didn't know her at all. The payroll report on his phone wasn't just a document. It was a declaration of independence. The days that followed were lived in a strange, fragile truce. The architecture of their marriage, which had seemed so solid, was now revealed to be nothing more than a stage set, and neither of them knew how to act on it anymore. Richard was adrift. He would look at Eleanor across the dinner table, a table she still set, a dinner she still cooked out of habit, with a mixture of awe and resentment. He tried to be interested in her work, asking clumsy questions about branding and client acquisition, but his attempts felt hollow, like a tourist trying to speak a language he doesn't understand. He couldn't grasp the core of it, that her success wasn't about the money. The money was just a symptom, a consequence. The success was about the reclamation of her own soul. He saw the profit margin and thought, we're rich. He didn't see the late nights of study and thought, she's brilliant. He didn't see the courage it took to start over and think, she's brave. For Eleanor, the house had transformed. It was no longer a cage, but simply a property, a collection of assets. The clarity she'd felt in the study that night hadn't faded. It had become her new compass. She realized the question was no longer how they could fix their marriage. The question was whether the woman she had become still wanted to be in it. The answer, when it came to her, was not born of anger or bitterness. It was a quiet, simple, and unshakable truth. No, she told him a week later. They were in the living room, the television off, the silence between them no longer charged with tension, but simply empty. I'm going to be moving out, Richard, she said, her voice calm. He looked stunned, as if the thought had never occurred to him. Moving out? Why? Eleanor, we can work through this. I was wrong. I was an idiot. I see that now. I see you. Do you? She asked, her tone gentle but firm. Or do you see the numbers on a spreadsheet? You didn't see me when I was spending my days making this house a perfect home for you. You didn't see me when I was raising our son. You didn't see me when I was lonely and losing myself. You only saw me when I presented you with a financial report that mirrored your own definition of success. I cannot live a life where my worth is only visible when it's validated by a balance sheet. She explained that she wasn't filing for a bitter divorce. She wanted a dissolution, an equitable separation of the life they had built together. Her business, the Whirlwind Studio, was hers alone. She had the documentation, the separate accounts, the proof that it was built outside of their shared finances. He did not argue. The fight had gone out of him. He had been so busy earning a living that he had completely forgotten to value a life. 2 months later, Eleanor unlocked the door to her new apartment. It was smaller than the house, but it felt infinitely larger. It was a 2-bedroom overlooking a park with a spare room that she was converting into a dedicated, light-filled office. There were no heavy mahogany tables, no beige walls. It was a blank canvas, and for the first time in 20 years, she was the only artist. She didn't just survive. She thrived. The Whirlwind Studio grew, and so did she. She traveled, not to resorts, but to the places she'd always dreamed of seeing. She walked on that windswept beach in Oregon, the cold spray on her face feeling like a baptism. She reconnected with old friends, the ones who had known the fiery girl with paint on her cheek, and they welcomed her back as if no time had passed. Her relationship with her son, Leo, deepened. When she finally told him the whole story, he wasn't surprised. "I always knew you were a genius, Mom," he said. "I'm just glad you reminded Dad." Eleanor's story isn't about a marriage ending. It's about a woman's life truly beginning. It's a powerful reminder that our value is not determined by the opinions of others, especially when those opinions are clouded by their own definitions of success. Her worth was never gone. It was just invisible to the one person who should have seen it most clearly. By secretly building her own world, she wasn't just creating a business. She was forging a key to unlock herself from a cage she had unknowingly helped to build. The moment she sent that email wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of liberation. It was her finally saying, "I am here, I have always been here, and now you will see me." What Eleanor's journey teaches us is that sometimes the most important work we do is the work that no one sees. It's the quiet effort we put into ourselves, into our growth, and into our own secret gardens of ambition and hope. It's about having the courage to finally show the world, and maybe even ourselves, what has been blooming in the shadows. If you have ever felt unseen or undervalued, let her story be a gentle reminder that your worth is inherent and unshakable. Keep watering your own garden. Nurture your own dreams, because you never know when the moment will come to show everyone the beautiful, powerful harvest you have created. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it today. Until next time, take care and believe in the value of your own unique story.